If you've been shopping around for a mid-size SUV lately, you've probably been noticing that things are getting pretty expensive out there. And while we have seen a range of new affordable Chinese options come onto the market, as we've talked about in our reviews recently, a lot of the cars just kind of miss that extra polish which we do find on mainstream offerings. So where does that leave you? Well, there are still a few really good value mainstream options in the mid-size SUV segment, and one of them is the Subaru Forester. We've got one here today in top spec 2.5i S grade in the petrol variant, and this will cost you just over $46,000. And that's pretty good value when you consider that rivals out there will see you paying more like 50 grand plus for that sort of trim. It's also worth considering that although color and grade and things like that can affect how long you can expect to wait, we're told that wait times are about 1 to 2 months for a petrol variant of the Forester, which is pretty good. So in short, it's a pretty affordable car that you can get pretty soon, and it's got a pretty good reputation to go with it. But is it actually any good? Well, some of you might remember that it placed third in our mid-size SUV Megatest, and that was behind the Toyota RAV4 and the Volkswagen Tiguan. However, in 2023, we've seen some new rivals come onto the scene, like the new Nissan X-Trail, and we also expect to see the Forester replaced in the next few years. So how does it shape up in today's market? Well, today we're going to talk all about it. If you take one thing away from today's video about the Forester, it should be the fact that this car likes to do things a little different in a lot of different ways, and that starts with the size. Now, for the mid-size SUV segment, it's actually pretty compact compared to our Seltos long-termer, which sits on the upper end of what you classify as a small SUV. The Forester is just a little bit bigger in all dimensions, and as we'll talk about in a second, it doesn't compromise on interior space. Now, Subaru facelifted this car in 2021. They modified the headlights, but generally what you see here is fairly familiar from what we've seen around from 2018, 2019. Overall, I really quite like the design. We see some rivals in this segment, like the Volkswagen Tiguan, they go for more of a sleeker design, but the Forester here has gone in the same vein of, say, like a RAV4, and it's a bit more utilitarian, which means you've got a bit more ground clearance. You've sort of got these chunkier sidewalls here on these big tires, and that means you're not going to be afraid to go hop some curbs or take this on a hiking trail. And I think that's a really big advantage, and personally something I love to see in an SUV, because of course you do want to be able to take these things off the beaten track. Otherwise, why not just buy a sedan? Being the top spec grade, we're sitting on leather seats here, and the magic number here is 8. You've got 8 ways of adjustment, and you've also got an 8-inch touchscreen here. And it's one of 3 that Subaru has gone with in this setup. You've got a 6.3-inch here, and you've got a 4.2-inch between the 2 analog gauges here. And all in all, they kind of give you a little bit of information, but I will note that this screen here is the main one, and it's not really keeping up with some of its rivals here. Case in point, if you've got Android Auto and it's going for a split display system on here like I have it, those windows are getting increasingly smaller on an 8-inch screen. Like a 10-inch screen on some other models is probably a little bit more suitable. Another perk of going for the top S grade is you get an 8-speaker Harman-Kardon sound system. And interestingly, you combine this with a CD player. It's going to be one of the few cars on the market that still has a CD player, but it's there if you want it indeed. So what's this car missing that rivals do have? Some of its newer rivals specifically. Well, you don't have a full width digital driver's display, you don't have a heads-up display, you don't have wireless CarPlay. However, we do expect that to be introduced when Subaru puts in the new 11.6-inch portrait touchscreen that it's put in its other models. Now, of that list, probably the heads-up display is pretty much the only one that I would personally like to see in this model. I think everything else is a little bit like take it or leave it, but that will be up to you ultimately. As far as storage goes, look, you've got bottle holders in the doors, they're not massive, and you do have this pretty deep center console here and of course a glove box. But the one thing I will highlight is it doesn't really seem to be a place to put your phone. Now you can sort of fit this in here, but given the fact that you've got wired CarPlay here, once you plug it in, the phone doesn't really fit, and that's a bit unfortunate. Sitting in the back here, the perks of the interior space continue. I've got great visibility out of here. And of course, sitting behind my own driving position at 6 foot tall, I've got heaps and heaps of knee room, heaps of toe room as well. And it's a pretty comfortable place to be. As far as amenities goes, well, we've got 4 cup holders, 2 in this pull down armrest here and 1 in each of the doors. We've also got some air vents here, which are great for kids to try and keep some more air on the face. And of course, you've got that visibility, as I said. You've also got some USB ports down here to keep your devices topped up. You don't have heated seats, you know, certainly not the end of the world, and you can get them in the Outback Touring. You've also got some seat pockets here, and while that sunroof is pretty big, it doesn't quite go all the way to the back here. So just some things to note. It's also worth noting that as far as missing features goes, it would be nice to see some cargo blinds in the second row here. Something I certainly look for in a car, and if you're a parent that wants to keep the shade off their kid's face, that's a good feature to have. So with all that back seat room, what's it like for baby seats? Well, first of all, the door opens pretty much all the way to 90 degrees, not quite, but pretty close. And we can pretty easily put in our rearwards facing seat here. It goes fairly comfortably, and we haven't needed to move the front seat forward at all. So I'd call that a win. Coming around to the boot here, we open up the power tailgate, which is a nice touch, and we open it to reveal a 498 litre boot. Now, I like quite a few things about this boot. The first is that this cargo blind actually has somewhere to go when you're not using it. You keep it under the floor, similar to the Outback I used to have, and you reveal a full-size spare under there, which is another major bonus for those who like doing a bit of touring. Also in here, we have some switches to pull down the back seats, and we've got 4 shopping bag hooks, plus 4 tie-down points to make sure your load isn't rattling everywhere. And finally, also just like to point out that there are 3 top tether points on the backs of the seats. Unlike some that we do see strapped to the roof for some reason, which is a bit annoying when you want some rear visibility, it's great that they're on the back of the seats, like so. Subaru claims a fuel economy of 7.4 litres per 100 Ks for the Forester petrol. However, in our week of testing, we've seen 8.3 litres per 100 Ks. And that as tested figure, I probably wouldn't call particularly good, nor would I call it particularly bad. And also remember that you're only using 91 octane fuel. As far as warranty goes, Subaru offers the industry standard 5-year unlimited kilometre warranty. Servicing intervals, they're 12,500 kilometres or every 12 months, whatever comes first. As far as what you can expect to pay for servicing over those 5 years, well, Subaru has a cap price servicing program, and it will see you pay $2,675 during that time. You are able to pay for those services up front. However, unlike we've seen from Volkswagen, for example, you won't save money by paying for them up front, which is a little bit disappointing. As far as insurance goes, over the last 12 months, the median Budget Direct customer paid $948 to comprehensively insure a new Subaru Forester. Of course, everybody's situation is different, and the premium will vary according to make, model, and other things insurers take into account, such as your postcode, driving history, who drives the car, and where you garage the car. Getting behind the wheel of the Forester, and it doesn't take long to reveal one of its defining traits, and that has to be its soft suspension. Now that means a few things. The first is that it's pretty comfortable. You know, a lot of those big potholes and things like that really aren't going to give you that much trouble, or even if they do throw you around a little bit, they're not going to crash through the car. It's not going to be uncomfortable and jarring on yourself. However, due to the nature of the Forester being a fairly tall car for how wide it is, it does mean that the car feels a little bit challenged when you're going around corners in comparison to some of its rivals. And well, what does that mean for you as a driver? Well, that means that it's not necessarily that, you know, like you'll be taking corners at high speeds. It's more just the fact that you do feel a little bit more challenged yourself in the cabin. So for example, here when driving some laps around our test track, and I've been bracing myself against the center console here, which unfortunately doesn't have a lot of padding down here, whereas in comparison to some of its rivals, I do feel more relaxed behind the wheel. So it's something to keep in mind, because I think it does affect the way that you drive this car. You slow down a little bit more, and that's probably, you know, not always a bad thing, but if you are someone who likes to push the car a little bit more, just something to keep in mind. Now, the Forester uses a 2.5 litre naturally aspirated engine. I had the same unit in my Subaru Outback long-termer that I used to run. However, this one's a little bit detuned in comparison to that engine, and I think it's unfortunately not a great combination when you combine it with the CVT transmission. That power figure doesn't kick in till 5,800 RPM, and the torque doesn't kick in till 4,400 RPM, which is pretty high up the rev range. And of course, because of the way that CVTs work, they're designed to keep you in the power band. And when there's not a lot of grunt on offer, it means that the engine is constantly trying to chase those high revs. What does all that mumbo jumbo mean? Well, essentially it means that this car can be a little bit loud, and it can be loud often. Pulling onto a highway, yes, of course it's going to be loud, but also it's just kind of around town. The needle spikes pretty quickly. However, I do think that Subaru has a solution to this problem, and they should consider bringing it to Australia. And that's the 1.8 litre turbocharged flat 4 engine that they offer in Japan. This is a Japanese sourced vehicle, of course, so you don't see why they can't bring it over here. Unfortunately, they're not currently considering it. But although I haven't driven that engine, the results that we've recently seen with the Outback comparison, comparing its 2.5 litre naturally aspirated engine against the turbocharged 2.4, not only saw a performance benefit, but perhaps more importantly, we also saw a huge benefit in the lack of sound that the turbo is making, and it just brings you a more refined experience. Of course, there is also quite a bit more torque on offer in the 1.8 litre. So it makes 130 kilowatts of power, so you are losing about 6 kilowatts there, but you're gaining an extra 60 odd newton meters of torque because it has a peak torque of 300 newton meters. So that's something I'd really like Subaru to consider bringing to Australia. However, given that the Forester is coming to sort of the end of its life, I think it's probably more likely that we'll see that engine in a follow-up generation, or at least I hope that's the case. One of the things I really do like about Subarus in general, I experience this a lot in my Outback, but also in this Forester here, is the symmetrical all-wheel drive system. Compared to a lot of other rivals, the rear wheels just feel significantly more engaged. A lot of rivals just really don't want to send power to the rear wheels unless you're pretty much 100% in the throttle. And I think that's a bit of a shame, because the active nature of the Subaru all-wheel drive system means that you feel a bit more stable, and that's both on and off the road, and you can see why this is a real favourite of people who love to go on dirt roads and go hiking on the weekends. I think it's also pretty notable to see that you don't have to go far on social media to see that a lot of people have taken Subarus like the Forester and they've just kitted them out as ultimate off-road vehicles, and they go on trails that often you would only take a four-wheel drive with a proper low-range transfer case. And while they can't do everything, it is really impressive to see what the Subaru all-wheel drive system can do when pushed to its limits. And a lot of that is down to the X mode. I love the way it's down here and you have a nice little knob. It looks like you're slipping into low range. And also you don't have 20 different settings that you don't need. You've got a snow and dirt and also a snow and mud setting to give you a little bit more flexibility there. But essentially it works by just controlling the wheel speed, so you're not having wheels slipping all over the place. And I've used it before in the past and it's pretty effective. It does raise the question though, with the popularity of this all-wheel drive system, why doesn't Subaru bring the wilderness version of the Forester to Australia? They've spoken about it in the past, they do seem really keen, and we hope that follows through, because I think that would be a very popular option for Subaru buyers out there who just want to take this car to the next level. However, in its current form, I think it's quite suited to those hiking trails on the weekend. You don't need to go out and get special tyres or anything like that and ruin your daily drivability of the car. But what about in terms of safety? Well, the Forester is getting a little bit on in years, and I don't want to blow that claim out of proportion. You know, the ANCAP score was tested in 2019 shortly after it launched. It's not like we're talking yonks away. However, that is a few protocols behind, and while it did get 5 stars, it hasn't been tested according to the latest demands, and that does mean that it misses out on a front center airbag, and that is offered in rivals like my Outlander long-termer, the X-Trail, and even the Haval H6. However, it does still have a pretty comprehensive list of safety features, which is very comforting to a lot of family buyers in particular. You got your usual full suite of airbags, and you've got a front camera, rear camera, and the side camera that I've talked about previously, but you've also got things like rear cross traffic alert and lane keeper system and adaptive cruise control, and I want to talk about those in particular. So essentially this week I've taken this in some heavy traffic. I've also taken it on some challenging highways, which lane keep assist often struggles to keep up with. You usually see a bit of rebounding and things like that. However, it's really well tuned in the Subaru, and I commend them for the extra effort they've made into getting it just right, because it means that this adaptive cruise control system is something you can rely on, which I can't say for all cars out there. And finally, I just want to bring attention to reversing AEB, which is fitted to this car. And as a dad, I've got to say, this is an absolute non-negotiable for a family car due to the nature of the accidents they prevent. And it's something that I would recommend putting high up on your priority list when looking at a family SUV. If you ask a Subaru owner what they want for the next car, the chances are they're going to say they want another Subaru. It's because these cars just seem to be the sort of thing you either get or you just kind of don't. Subaru takes pride in doing things just a little bit differently, like having mandatory all-wheel drive, having 3 screens in the infotainment system instead of just one, or even having a CD player in 2023. These are some things that the owners love and others just find a little bit strange. However, there are some things about the Forester which I think appeal to everyone, like having well-tuned safety systems, huge interior space, having that mountain goat-like off-roading ability, and also just the outright affordability of the car in the first place. And while we do really look forward to the next generation of the Forester, as it stands in its current form, it's still a good buy in 2023. But that's what I think. What do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. But for now, that's all. Thanks for watching Chasing Cars.